You are listening to the Good Girl Podcast. The Good Girl Podcast, a podcast of women's confessions about our flaws, faith, femininity, and culture. Everything is on the table. We destigmatize the messy process of figuring out life. Raise your hand, ladies and gents and folks. Raise your hands if you got some wisdom, some compassion, some like you found out a true nugget of life through a sincerely messy process, whether it was a relationship, whether it was a bad decision, whether it was something you were not proud of, but you found out that you should or shouldn't do this through an extremely messy process, right? And so I want you guys to talk about it here because I think life is about, becoming the best version of yourself. And I know that, other versions of ourselves, oftentimes they aren't the best. And it's this process of becoming that we have to honor and that we have to recognize, and that we also should extend grace to folks when we see them becoming or when they aren't the best version of themselves. And so I call these conversations confessions. And so the goal is to have every week is to have someone on sharing a confession about their life with the goals of healing and freeing other folk to say, you know what, I was in that position. It's all right, but this is how you get out of it. And also, so, we love to pass judgment. We love to cancel folks, the cancel culture. And so I want to shift that culture with these conversations. So as always, if you have a confession, head to our website, thegoodgirlpodcast.com, and just hit the click. Just click. It's right on the homepage. Click confess, and you can fill out a form and share something, and we'll contact you if we're interested. And we'll go from there. All right, y'all. So listen up really quick to learn a little bit about the guest that who we're going to talk to for this week.
I tell people all the time, I am probably not the creative mind.
This is Debbie Idapolo.
I'm not a seamstress. I can't sew. I don't draw. I can't do any of those kinds of things.
She's the deputy health officer with the Ingham County Health Department.
But what I hope I do is create an atmosphere for other people who have those creative minds, who think sort of outside the box.
Debbie is over all public health services, which includes everything from maternal child health to environmental health to WIC, just to name a few.
We have oftentimes a lot of parameters because you have federal funding, you have state funding, and there's a lot of rigidity in some of those things. And so we have to think creatively in terms of how we're going to best serve clients. And that may mean that we look at how do we engage other agencies who have more flexibility? How do we partner with them to do some of the things that we may not be able to do?
And while a creative environment is an important factor in her job, Debbie adds that in order to do the job well, you have to be flexible.
A lot of people really want some clear-cut, concise things. And as you know, when you're dealing with people, it's not always that easy. And so you have to be prepared to be creative and to think outside of the box and to think differently, because we really want to support families and individuals in Ingham County.
So now that we know a little bit about Debbie, and I chose Debbie because I stay in Lansing, and Lansing is the capital city of Michigan. And so you have elected officials coming here 2 or 3 times a week, or you used to, I'll say that, when the world was open, to enact policy and make laws. And so having Debbie at the center of all of that in the middle of a global pandemic and being a Black woman, I felt that this conversation was important. And I felt that it would hopefully give us some hope and open our eyes a little bit to what's happening behind the scenes. So listen to our conversation. So Debbie, I am so excited to have you on the Good Girl Podcast. This is your first appearance on the Good Girl Podcast.
Yes. Woo, woo.
Woo, woo. Welcome to the Good Girl Podcast, fam, the Good Girl Podcast land, I guess you can call this.
Thank you.
Typically, and we've already learned a little bit about you. And typically when I invite people on to the Good Girl Podcast, or we have any type of conversations, typically it's around a confession. And so I know I didn't ask you for a confession, But I really wanted to have this conversation about where we are as a community, as Black and Brown people, in the wake of everything that's happening and how it is affecting our health and how that very much intertwines with health departments. You know, we sometimes have these conversations in bubbles, but we don't realize that we have allies, that there are people sincerely working for when we come back to everything. And I don't want to say when everything comes back to normal, but when we are ready to enter this new normal, what is it going to look like? What are we considering? You know, who's behind making some of these moves and having these conversations that really make sense for our community? And also just knowing that, you know, some Black folks is like, I'm good. I'm good. So welcome. And I'm so excited about the conversation we're going to have.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. So the first question, you hold a very influential role in the Ingham County Health Department. You are the Deputy Health Officer, and you are over services that very much are lifelines to folks' health in communities. And so with that being said, understanding that we are literally in the middle of a global pandemic, one that I don't think we have seen in our lifetime.
No.
What is a lesson you've learned in this? One of your most valuable lessons?
First, let me just say thank you for having me on your show. And I am glad you didn't ask me about some confession, because I have a lot of secrets. So I bet you didn't ask me, because I don't want to have to tell no story. I want to tell no lie.
We're going to ask you back. We're going to ask you back specifically for a confession, Debbie.
So thank you for not asking. But one of the things that I have learned is that we don't know what the future holds. And we have to take care of people like there's a pandemic coming. And the pandemic has definitely exposed what we've already known, that people of color are disproportionately being impacted and affected by the COVID-19 virus. And so, I would just say that we have to figure out a better way to take care of all people, so that when it happens, that everybody has an opportunity to be well.
And it's interesting you say, I forget how you phrased it, but you said it, you know, it revealed what we already knew. So It was apparent to, you know, people who work in the system where they see these health disparities between Black and Brown folks. They see, you know, the hypertension, the asthma, like the diabetes, but COVID allowed it to, I guess, be made known on a broader scale.
Most definitely.
So I say it's one thing to have someone's attitude shift towards how we do this work, but have there been other changes along with the attitude shifting? Like, has that resulted in policy changes? Has that resulted in maybe how you've seen services being given or constructed or thought about as it relates to Black and Brown folks?
So one thing I will say is that public health, for the most part, recognizes that there are these disparities and issues. And so I know with Ingham County, though I would have liked to have gotten out sooner, we recognize that for many people of color, that we need to take the services or testing out into the community. And so we have done a really good job of getting out into the community. And we're still really working on trying to figure out how do we craft that message to say to Black and Brown people, hey, get tested if you're having symptoms, wear masks, do social distancing, and all the things that we know will help. And I think that that's an area that we're continuing to work on. I've heard people say that, you know, we're learning how to fly while we're we're up in the plane. And it's true for us in some ways. We are trying to figure it out. But I do think that we have different partners in the community who have some of those relationships. Crystal Ray, One Love Global, St. Vincent's, Refugee Development Services, all of those folks who work with some of those different communities of color who we can connect with, who can help us to really get those messages out. So we haven't really impacted the policies, I think, yet, but I do think that we're making some good headways by working with some of those other agencies in the community who can help us to get our messages out.
And being in a leadership position during this time, Debbie, have you learned anything about yourself? Because I believe that when pressure arises, we're surprised about the things that come out of us, who stands up, what stands up, as well as what we see in other folks. And because I believe your position is right in the center of it, I'm curious as to what you've seen, not only in yourself as a leader, but also in the world.
I would say for me, one of the things I've learned about myself, I'm like, I don't want no problems.
I don't want no problems.
I don't want no problems. I want it to go well. What I have learned is that, sometimes we got to run in the fire. And I don't want to, but I would rather run in the fire to be the one that I'm trying to tell what happened. I don't want to be that one. So as much as possible, I try to make sure that I'm supporting staff, those who are right out there on the front line. When we have testing events, oftentimes I go and I help and roll my sleeves up. I believe in being a servant leader. That's the leader who, is not the one just dictating, but they're also a part of what's happening. And so I had to really, I feel like I'm learning that I'm committed to who I say that I am, even in the midst of this global pandemic.
When you say run in the fire, what does that look like in the world? Like, what does that look like? Literally, folks running.
So sometimes even in the middle of it, we may want to shrink back, but sometimes we got to get right all up in it. We have to get out in those communities. At some point, we were going door to door to different communities to say, hey, we're testing. We have a high rate of COVID in this area. We really want you to get tested. And so it wasn't just staff saying you could go out there. I've gotten out there and I've knocked on the doors and I'm saying, hey, I need you guys to come and get tested, talk to community members. I've gone to people's houses to say, hey, listen, I need you to do this. You tested positive. You can't be hanging out and stuff. You need to isolate.
Wow.
So when I talk about going into the fire, that's what we do. I think that is what I've seen. And so I've continued to try to do that.
So there is a very huge expectation for when the world opens back up, and I have air quotes, when the world opens back up, that there may be this tension of going back to normal versus expecting what is the new normal. So what is the Ingham County Health Department doing, or how do they expect to change for this new normal as we re-enter the system? Because we already talked about the reality of health disparities that were apparent, that we knew about, but COVID just opened our eyes to more, opened the world's eyes to more.
Well, I will say this, that whatever happens, it can't be the health department alone. This is a systems issue. And so all of our systems are impacted. And so we have to think about it from a systems approach. And we have to think about our schools, housing, our work opportunities, insurance, all of those things. And, the hard part, and this has been even the struggle for myself, is it's going to take a both and. You're going to have to do some of both. You're going to have to be working on COVID and you have to do some of this. And we have to figure out, how do we stretch ourselves? How do we build capacity to really work on some of these issues? Because I do think that we cannot go back to the way we were. We can't go back to the place where our inner city schools are struggling to have what they need. We cannot go back to the place where we have large numbers of Black and brown people uninsured or underinsured. We cannot go back to a place where Black people don't have opportunities for jobs, good paying jobs, a living wage that allows them to care for families. We cannot go back to there. We cannot go back to the place where Black men and women are being killed by police. We cannot go back to any of those places. And I think that now is the time that we have to really start stretching ourselves, and our communities, not only our community, but communities across the world. So I don't usually name drop, but I'm going to name drop Kohl, the store Kohl's.
Okay.
Their CEO wrote a wonderful letter about what they're doing as a result of racism being a public health crisis. I was really impressed by it. I did drop her a letter.
I'm like, Kohl's need to write me a check now. You've been mentioned on the podcast. We need a check now.
But I was so impressed by it. So we've all said a lot of good words, self-included. What are we going to do now? And then how do we hold these systems and things accountable? Start with voting. I'll just throw that out there too in the podcast. But then how do we hold them accountable? And so much of public health, though we talk about policy work, it has really been program work. We work with individuals and we work with families. And I mean, that's good work. But now we're going to have to go bigger than that. We're going to have to really think about how we can change some of the structures. How do we really become not closet activists, but how do we become outspoken activists, organizers? When Dr. Kennedy was a part of the health department, she had put together, it was called Power to Thrive, and it brought organizers and public health together. You know, public health often feels like it can't say anything, but we have the data. And so how do you give organizers the data to go out and push for some of these changes? It lost some power. But I do think that we're in a time now we need to rethink that. And how does public health be empowered? We don't lobby, but we can educate. And so how do we do that?
I love the explanation behind that, because when we're clear on what institutions can and can't do, it really allows us to shift our positions and play our role like we should in the larger movement, and knowing what I can come to you for. So if it's Debbie, I'm working on this. Do you have some stats because I'm going to come to you for stats now. Do you have stats as it relates to this versus, having complaints and wanting you to change, wanting you to advocate for, like, I'm just giving you a service. It's like, this is what we can do. And this is what I can, this is what I can, this is how I can show up. And so you talked about statements, and Kohl's writing, and I love Kohl's, I do. And Kohl's, their CEO writing a really great letter. But also, you all partnered with the county, and you made a very clear statement, a declaration. It was on June 11th. There was a declaration that racism is a public health crisis.
That is correct.
And it's one of the first, you all were one of the first in the nation to make this declaration.
Well, we were one of the first, at least in our area. So Milwaukee, I believe, was the first. And so, but yes, you are correct. We did that.
And it's so funny because when I saw it, I said, "Whoa, like Ingham County out here." But
we did too.
But what a lot of the pushback was, it was on a live broadcast. But one of the pushback was kind of how you push back on Kohl's. Was like, these are words. What does this mean? So can you share what role this declaration plays, I'm hoping, in a larger picture?
So I will just say this. Though the health department didn't say, that we're declaring from the health department standpoint, but no, beyond a shadow of a doubt, we recognize it and have known it for a long time. You know how you know something, but you don't know what to do?
Definitely.
Or how to do it. And so we have known for a long time that it is a public health crisis. But this was an opportunity for us to say, along with our county elected officials, that yes, this truly is a public health crisis. And we know that it's a crisis because when we look at the disparities in many or most of our health outcomes, we know that Black and brown folks are disproportionately impacted negatively. And so the declaration helps us to define that there's a problem. It mandates us to come up with some measurements, and it invites us into a space of accountability. And so, and we're still working through what all that means. You know, sometimes I like things to come in a very orderly fashion. So I don't want to declare a public health crisis and I don't want a pandemic at the same time. Unfortunately, that's not what we got. We got it all at one time. And so we're still in the process of really trying to understand what all that means. How do we work that out? I know that our governing body has adopted a resolution to declare it a public health crisis. I know that they're in the process of creating a task force. They're looking at health in all policies. And so it is definitely before them. And so they're doing some things from a county level. I know that internally we are also talking about some things that we're trying to figure out. And it's, you know, for many years, public health, I don't know if you know this, but for many years, public health has been underfunded. Mm-hmm. So it's not like we had a bunch of staff who could just do all these kinds of things. And we don't have a lot of staff. And so really trying to figure out how do we do all of this. And we also have some internal work that has to be done so that we prepare ourselves and our staff to understand what that means and then what their role is in that. And I think that those are things that we are beginning to look at and start to work on right now.
And when you talk about some of those things, I think one of the issues maybe that specifically occur within Black communities and brown communities as well is literally the fear of going to any type of doctor, any type of health professional, and for several reasons. One, for fear that you're not listened to, for fear that you are the next experiment.
Yes.
And just not having a good relationship, even with something as simple as the attitudes of staff towards clients, is what I'll call them. So is there some type of effort to or to understand that process? Like I want to add one more piece to it too, but also money. Like I just don't have the money, or I would rather sit at home, hope and pray that it goes away. You know, and it's nothing wrong with faith, but I think when wisdom is there, let's use wisdom.
That's right.
You know, over faith, not over faith, but they work in tandem.
Yes.
So
faith without works is dead.
Thank you. And so, and there are literally folks who will stay at home and wait until they literally have to go till it's almost too late, or it could have been prevented. And it's because of this relationship that folks have with healthcare professionals. And again, I want to say this all isn't on the Ingham County Health Department. This is not something that you created. It is not something that you maintain, but definitely being a part of the system is a role that the health department plays. So I say all that to say, you know, what is IHD's response to that?
I will say that those fears sometimes are real. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you look at, there is literature out there that speaks to biases in the medical profession. And so sometimes that fear can be real. But I would say at the health department, we, as much as possible, we try to we provide our staff with training about recognizing our differences and our biases. And so that we hope that people would know that we are welcoming. We want people to feel like that they can come in there and receive good quality services. And if they're not, that they can let us know that. And then it gives us an opportunity to work on ourselves. I know when we were out doing COVID testing, I had ran into a couple of brothers, And I was like, y'all gonna come and get tested? I was like, oh no, y'all ain't gonna be experimenting on me. I'm like, just get a test. Just, he's like, no. And I understand. But I would say that we're in a new day, at least I hope so. So I'm gonna go out on the limb a little bit and say that we are by far in a different place than we used to be. And I really believe that the Ingham County Health Department wants the best for all people in Ingham County. And that when we're out there, it really is a way for us to show that we are servants. We're here to provide service and good services to folks. And so I would say, it's up to us to show ourselves trustworthy. And so I would say that's where the onus is for us. And we talk about bettering ourselves, doing better, being more customer friendly. And so I would say that is the mantle that we are picking up and that we're running with and trying to be better. I went to McDonald's one day, and even McDonald's, the people seem really nice. And so if people at McDonald's can be really nice, it doesn't cost us anything to be nice.
Nothing.
Or to be caring. And I know that is what we're pushing for. And if people come into the Ingham County Health Department, any of our facilities, and they're not received in a respectful manner, I would say, call me.
The question I have is how do you teach nice? How do you teach care? Because like that's literally what you have to do. And it's how do you teach that? Because that's I know we're talking about the Ingham County Health Department, but this is something that everybody needs right now is be kind.
Well, think of it this way. It's only been in the last 60 years that people have seen the worth of people who look like you and I. The residual of that still goes on. We have goodwill. Racism isn't our mama or my mama's racism. Racism and racist thoughts and ideas are different than they were when we were coming up. I mean, when I was coming up, because you young enough to be probably my child. So, but racism is different. And so it takes on different forms. And I think that if people would stop and listen to themselves, their inner thinking, when they see things and hear things, or people who don't look like them, and begin to question that. Because I agree. Can you teach somebody how to be nice? We are in this place now where, we don't, you used to say, treat people like you want to be treated. But we recognize people are different. So how you don't mind somebody holler at you, somebody else might mind. So treat people how they want to be treated.
That's a good word. That's a good word. When it comes to health and wellness, one of the leading topics in this conversation also has been mental health. Mm-hmm. And that's very much a new topic in our conversations in Black and Brown communities. For obviously historical purposes. And I explain it like this: when mom and dad are concerned about your physical being, are you alive? Are you going to come home? Do you have food in your belly? And that basic need is a struggle to be met. Mental health and social emotional health falls far down. Yes. on what's needed. So I understand how we got here. But as this conversation is coming more to the forefront, again, I think about the role of IHD and how they play into somewhat normalizing what's important as it relates to your entire health, your entire being. Because I think we separate it too. It's like, oh, my body is good, I'm fine. But then, your mental health is over here kind of in a corner. And so how has IHD or how are you all bringing that to the forefront?
So I will say that most, if not all, of our clinical services in our federally qualified health centers have behavioral health specialists embedded in those services. So if they see something or something's going on, they do have a way to access treatment and care for someone. But I will say, and generally, and I think it's not just Ingham County, but it's across the country. What we don't have, and I think that we haven't done as well as I would hope, is that we don't have a way to treat particularly people of color who have experienced racism, trauma as a result of being Black and how they've been treated. We don't have professionals who know how to really treat that. I know of a couple of people who went to seek out some mental health services, but were unable to find practitioners who look like them. And so really thinking about how do we create this place for people of color to really get the help that they need, and that recognizes the trauma that comes along with being a person of color in this world. And it's the little microaggressions that happen every day. And that, sometimes you just get, my angry me that I told you about, how you deal with that. Now I am a social worker, so, but I too have to reach out and get some treatment, be able to talk to somebody about those things that make me angry so that I don't go somewhere and go off and be the angry Black woman that I can be. And so I do think that trying to figure out how do we have a space and a place for people of color to receive the mental health treatment that they may need or desire to work through some of those things that we have to go through on a daily basis.
That was so amazing. Like it really, I don't know if I got chills, but just the acknowledging that we are definitely in a position where there are folks who are seeking out mental health services, and there is a gap, or that there is a challenge that we are just now I don't want to say just now coming into the knowledge, but who can really have a full conversation of breadth and depth with you when there isn't an understanding of what comes along with, my spirit being wrapped up in this brown flesh.
Yes. Yes.
When there is, like, you have no background or no idea. And even like just this year, it was declared a public health, like we understood it. And yes. Folks who are in the work knew it, but there are so many people that are like, wow. And it's like, no, you guys are just catching up. We've been here.
Yes. Yes.
Wow. Maternal health. When I know I kind of tapped you and said, I'm going to reach out to you for statistics, but my understanding is that Black women still lead the majority of households in the Black community. They are leaders in our church. They are leaders on the job, but they're also the least paid. They carry a lot of stress.
Yes.
And if you combine all of that and literally being a mother and creating life, and we know some of the statistics or some of the recent stories that came out about Black mothers who didn't receive proper care, and they died. And also with you being a mother, how does that affect you, and how do you hope the health department responds to this?
So most of my career, my work has been in maternal child health. So for me, it's very, it's dear to my heart because I understand what it is to be a mother of color. And I will just say that we haven't done well nationally in terms of, I looked at something, and where it comes to maternal mortality, I think we're 50th out of all of the countries the United States is. I was on a webinar today with a young man who talked about his wife who died. She was healthy, she got pregnant, she had a baby, and just the time that it took for her to get the care that she needed, it was too late, and she ended up dying. And this story touched me. I was just sitting there, and I felt a little discombobulated because, you go to a conference and you think, oh, it's going to be uplifting and those kinds of things. But it's the reality that maternal infant mortality is on the rise. and that we're losing Black women um, from preventable things that could have been prevented. And it's really sad and it's unfortunate. And I do think that we have to figure out another way to support Black women. I was telling someone recently, sometimes we put a lot of pressure on our daughters to be perfect. But for those who are my age group, I'll be 60. We didn't get the parenting or the knowledge about being a woman and what our bodies meant and how we should act and all of those different things. We didn't get a lot of that because our mothers didn't get them, because they came from this space and time where they weren't even valued. They were barely a woman. They were more or less like property. And so a lot of that stuff we didn't have. And so we have to forgive ourselves. We have to be a little more gentler with ourselves and recognize that we didn't get everything, but we can start afresh and new. And we have to figure out what are the things that we want to stand for. And then we have to go out and be those activists to create something different for our daughters and our granddaughters than what we had.
This is so different, this conversation. I feel like we couldn't have this conversation if you weren't Black, if I weren't Black. It just is, because I think about historically, Debbie, where we come from, the fact that this nation, like the nation we exist in, the reason why it is as profitable and as great, to have great in quotes, as it is today, is because it was built on the wombs of Black women. Like the human resource through Black women is what kept this country going. And knowing that emotion, knowing that the thought process, and everything too that a Black woman carries when she is birthing a child, and she knows this, like that still runs through our veins, and it shows up in maternal health care services. And even though I'm speaking specifically for Black, because when you said we have to forgive ourselves, like how often do we talk about forgiveness as it relates to ourselves? And that's for Black women. And then I also think about how we're bringing up the next generation of non-Black people or white kids who may have a parent who upholds white supremacy. Like all these things come up under maternal health. Like that is probably one of the most important areas of focus when we talk about sincerely making change.
Yes.
When we talk about the next generation and what it will look like and starting to form that. So especially with this being your heart, especially with this being, in a sense, what you've trained in, is there something that you would like to see or something that you want to give to this space as we are being ushered into this new normal?
One of the things that I would say is that I would love to see more opportunities for young mothers and families. Equity, when we talk about health equity, it's about providing folks with what they need to be successful in life. And I think that we are a country where we give you just a little bit. And we ask you to make do and to make miracles come out of it. I would love to see us just lay it all down. And I would say, can we have some childcare? Folks need to be able to go to work. Can we have some childcare? Can we have health care? And when I'm talking about Black women and women of color, but I'm talking about all women. We need childcare. We need paid maternity leave, things that have a real impact on people's lives to make a difference. Can you imagine people who are working in factories who get pregnant and they still got to go to work every day? And I just think that we need to think differently about how do we value people? We as a country, we value people who make money. If you don't make money, we don't value it. And so I would just offer up, how do we value all people? And particularly our mothers. We're so upside down sometimes. To me, you would value your mother because you want her to be healthy when she's having babies and she's well taken care of. Our school teachers, we would value our school teachers because we know that they're training our precious children. And so I just think that we have to come to a place in our country and how we value people, because we haven't shown that to be the case.
Well, Debbie, I thank you so much for this conversation. It was very filling for me, and it was also insightful in knowing that there is influencers like you in the Ingham County Health Department, and also simply taking the time to have this conversation with me in a conversation of depth, and also bringing who you are into this conversation. It's different when you talk about stats and you talk about, oh, well, the department does this, but you also brought very much yourself into this space, and I'm grateful for that. So thank you.
Well, I really appreciate it, Cameo. So before I was like, oh, what you gonna say here? I often have to think about what I'm gonna say before I say it. So I appreciate it. What you got was real. Now, I don't know who else believe it, but that was the real me. And I just appreciate you giving me the opportunity to share the real me. And so maybe in a few months, I'm not going to tell you what's going to happen in a few months, but maybe in a few months, you'll let me come back and I'll give you the real me.
Okay. Y'all heard it. So you're going to hold it to it.
All right.
Thank you so much.
All right. Take care.
Quality healthcare is coming to a neighborhood near you. Sparrow, the Ingham County Health Department, and Dean Transportation are teaming up to bring their mobile health clinic right to your neighborhood. Throughout the month of October through December, the mobile health clinic is offering free health screenings and services at no charge. Yup, free screenings that cover everything from cholesterol to diabetes to blood pressure. Also immunizations, flu shots, and even referrals to cancer prevention screenings. If there are any questions, shoot a quick email to Sparrow Mobile Health Clinic at sparrow.org. Again, that email address, Sparrow Mobile Health Clinic at sparrow.org. I'll also post all the details and the dates on the Good Girl Podcast website and on social media.